Szanowni Państwo, jest mi niezmiernie miło, szczególnie dzisiaj powitać z nami profesora Roberta Cialdiniego, jednego z największych psychologów społecznych na świecie. Człowieka, który napisał książkę, która na mojej uczelni, na Uniwersytecie Warszawskim w Instytucie Stosowanych Nauk Społecznych była w zasadzie Biblią i do tej pory, jak profesor Tomasz Zaleśkiewicz powiedział, jest to super biały kruk i książka, która się sprzedaje chyba z książek psychologicznych w Polsce najlepiej, a także na świecie. I co? Nie będę Państwu zabierał więcej czasu. Bardzo się cieszę, że jesteście z nami. Od razu zapraszam do zadawania pytań. So let's switch into English. Robert, thank you for being with us. And Tomasz, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this nice introduction in Polish. Now the rest of our meeting will be in English. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tomasz Zaleśkiewicz. I am a professor of psychology at SWPS University in Warsaw, Poland, and it is my great pleasure and also great privilege to be the host of tonight's webinar. And as you already know, tonight we have a very special guest, one of the best known social scientists in the world, Professor Robert Cialdini. Professor Cialdini, welcome to the webinar.
Well, thank you, Tomasz. I'm very pleased to be here and have a chance to interact with Polish audiences. I have visited Poland in the past very frequently, and I've always enjoyed my interactions with Polish audiences. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. So let me begin with introducing Professor Cialdini. Well, I think it is probably not necessary to introduce Professor Cialdini because everybody who's interested in psychology or in business knows works by Professor Cialdini very well, but the achievements of Professor Cialdini are so great that it would be a shame not to recall them. So Robert Cialdini is professor of psychology and marketing at Arizona State University. He was also visiting professor of marketing, business and psychology at Stanford University. He is one of the best cited authors in psychology, but probably he's best known for his book about persuasion and marketing titled Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. The book was first published in 1984, and of course it was also published in Poland. The Polish title is Wywieranie, wpływu na ludzi. In this book, Professor Cialdini investigates 6 key principles of persuasion, and I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss them during our tonight's webinar. Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion is one of the best known psychological books ever. It has sold over 3 million copies and has been translated into 30 languages. It has been listed on the New York Times bestseller list, and Fortune magazine lists it in their 75 smartest business books. It is also mentioned in 50 psychology classics. And Professor Katie Milkman, professor of the Wharton School of Business, wrote about this book in the following way. I like this citation very much. If you could read just one book on how to be more effective in business and life, I'd pick Influence. It's a tour de force that Cialdini has somehow made more marvelous. I think this citation very precisely describes all things about influence, the psychology of persuasion. And of course, Professor Cialdini wrote more books than only this one, and his very recent book is Persuasion. It was published in 2016, and this book shows how even subtle turns of phrase, seemingly insignificant visual cues, and apparently unimportant details of location can prime people to say yes even before they are asked. I will also ask some questions concerning this recent book and your new discoveries in the field of social influence. So our tonight's webinar will be divided into two parts. In the first part, I will ask some questions to Professor Cialdini. I prepared a couple of questions concerning his work, the effects he found in his research. And as Bartosz said at the beginning of the webinar, all participants of our webinar are also invited to ask questions on chat. And in the second part, I will ask also questions from the chat. Okay, so Professor Cialdini, I think it is time to begin our discussion. And I will begin with let's start right from the beginning. So my first question concerns the origins of your interest in methods of influence and persuasion. So was it more the issue of your scientific interests or your observations of the real world? And have you recognized right from the beginning how powerful will be the applied potential of the effects you found in your research? So what were the origins? Can you tell us something about it?
Well, the earliest origins were actually personal. All my life, I found myself saying yes to various salespeople or fundraisers who would come to my door, and I would find myself in possession of things that I didn't really want at the outset of the presentation, or contributing to causes that I had hardly heard anything about, but wound up giving contributions to them. And after they would leave, I remember this is while I was still in university, saying to myself, isn't that interesting? It wasn't the merits of the thing that was offered to me that got me to say yes. It was the way those merits were presented to me, the psychology of the delivery of those merits, the way that this offer was presented to me, that got me to say yes, to give some of my money or to purchase some product or service. And it occurred to me that, well, isn't this interesting? There must be a psychology to this process that stands apart from the thing itself. The way you present the thing, there's a psychology to it that influence. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? That's worth studying, not just out of self-defense, so that I'd learned how to resist these kinds of presentations, but that other people would be interested in this. They would be interested in knowing how that works, how we say yes to requests, and the factors inside the request structure that lends themselves to assent. And so very early on, I was curious about this and decided, once I got into a position of being able to do research on it, decided that this was very much worthwhile, at the top of my list to begin to study.
Yeah, and then when you decided to write the book, did you know from the beginning that the book will be so successful that people will be so much interested in the topic of persuasion? Did you expect that?
I never expected it, because the book, I remember when I wrote it, there just wasn't a history of academic researchers writing for the larger public. That was rare. I didn't see any examples like that in my experience, but it seemed to me that that's the group of individuals I wanted to present this information to, so they would know about how the influence process works and how they could defend themselves against it if they wanted to, but also how they could understand how it worked and become more influential in their own lives, in their professional lives, in their personal lives, and so on. I wanted to talk to a non-academic audience for that reason, rather than just to my colleagues. So I didn't expect that to be the case, that it was successful. And for the first 2 or 3 years, it wasn't successful. It took a kind of word of mouth campaign to do it, where people who read the book would tell one another about it, and that led to a growth and a trend toward bestseller lists, where the book has now resided. And that includes in Poland, by the way. I have a colleague, Wilhelmina Wosinska, Professor Wosinska, who was located in Poland. Then she moved to the United States, became a colleague of mine. But while she was in Poland, she wrote to me and she said, "You know, Robert, your book Influence is so popular in Poland, my students think you're dead." Which I thought was a affirming commentary, but also a sobering one. They think I'm dead. I better revise this book. And so just last year, I wrote a revision of the book. So now it's in a new edition called New and Expanded, also available in Poland. But it took that kind of commentary to tell me, well, there's another step that you need to take so people know that you're still breathing.
Yeah. Influence in each country in which it was published, it immediately became a bestseller. But there are 2 very special countries in which I would say it is a super bestseller. So when we compare the number of copies sold to the population of the country, so there are 2 very special countries, which are South Korea and Poland.
Right.
These 2 countries' Influence is a super bestseller. Do you have any explanation for that?
You know, I used to have various kinds of explanations that were based on the history of those countries, the fact that both are located next to an authoritarian state, and have a history where they want to know how they can be. People want to know how they can be more successful without having various kinds of government restrictions or government orders that create that assent in an audience. And but then when I really researched it, it turns out it was something more ordinary than that. It was in those 2 countries, the translation of the book was excellent, and the promotion of the book by the publisher was excellent. So it was those 2 things, making sure that the message had a lot of similarity with what I was trying to say, and then that the publisher of the book promoted it widely and very well.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what's inside the book. Was it about? As I said at the beginning of our meeting, in Influence, you introduced 6 key principles of persuasions, which are reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity.
Right.
But I know that in the very recent version, in the very recent edition of your book, you added new principle, 7th principle, which is unity principle. So can you tell us something about it? Why you decided to add a new principle, and why unity is so important in the context of influence and persuasion?
Yes, the new principle, unity, really refers to a tendency of people to say yes to those communicators that they see as one of them, not just similar to them, but of them, right? They share an identity, an important social identity with that individual and that other individual. And if a communicator is able to arrange honestly for an audience to see him or her as one of them, then all influence attempts become more successful under those circumstances. There's an example I like to use. Now it's a United States-based example, but I think it shows what I'm talking about. It was a study done on a university campus where the researchers asked a young woman about college age, dressed the way a college student would. So there's similarity already there in the situation. They asked her to go to a place on campus and ask passersby to contribute to a good charitable cause. Right? And she was getting some response, not a lot. She was getting, but if the researchers asked her to begin with one sentence before she asked for a contribution, the contributions increased by 450%. So what was the sentence? The sentence was, I'm a student here too. I'm one of you. And it's very difficult. It's much more difficult to say no to someone who is of you, who is part of a group where you share an identity. So that's a small example of how it works. I can give you a personal example. A few years ago, I was submitting a grant proposal for a consideration, and I was doing the last polishing of the language before I sent it off the next day. It needed to be sent the next day. And I realized that there was one set of conclusions that I had drawn that I didn't really have good evidence to support. But I knew that a colleague I had, let's call him Tim, it wasn't his real name, but a colleague had done a study the year before, and he collected data that did support this conclusion. So what I needed was for him to send me the data that I could then incorporate into my presentation to go off the next day. So I needed it to happen quickly. And I sent him an email. I said, Tim, and I explained my situation. And I said, I'm going to call you to see how we could get the information to me today. All right. And Tim was known inside my psychology department as a kind of sour individual. He was not very welcoming or likable. You know, these kind of people, we all have them as colleagues. And when I called him, he said, hello, Bob. I know why you're calling. And the answer is no. Look, I'm a busy man. I can't be responsible for your poor time management skills just because you have this proposal due tomorrow. You waited too long. Now it's too late for me to go get the data out of my archives and get them over to you. I'm too busy for that. So what I would have said to him at that moment, if I hadn't recognized the research on the power of unity, I would have said, come on, Tim, I really need this. It's due tomorrow. And I don't have a good rationale for this particular set of conclusion. He had already said no to that. So I didn't say that. I said, come on, Tim, we've been in the same psychology department now for 12 years. And I had the data that afternoon. simply bringing to the surface that we were a unit. We were of the Arizona State University psychology department. I was one of us, like him. That did the trick. Okay, so that's what I mean by unity. Giving people evidence that there is a unit connection, there is a shared identity. And once that is the case, then we have to watch out for those kinds of communicators who do that, because we're very susceptible to them, as was Pim to my request. Yeah.
Yes. And would you agree that the unity principle is not just another principle on the list? It is not just the seventh principle, because my feeling is that it can be connected with all other principles,
right.
And referring to unity, by referring to unity, we can strengthen all other principles. Would you agree with that?
That is a very good insight, because that's the reason I didn't include it in the first list of 6. I thought of it as an accelerator of all the other principles. But then I started recognizing, oh no, it's by itself a source of influence. It's not just something that boosts the power of the other principles. It does do that, just as you're saying, Tomasz. But it stands by itself as well, right?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I see that we have some questions from the audience, questions on chat, and it seems to me that the first question on the list is somehow related to my next question. So let me read the first question from the list.
Great.
What changed during past 40 years since influence appeared for the first time? From my observations, it is not that easy now to get positive answers. Is it a change of people attitudes? So this is the question from the audience, and it is also related to my next questions, as I said, because the book was first published in 1980s, and since that time a lot of things have changed. Now we live in completely different reality. We live in a kind of virtual reality. A lot of communication is through social media, through internet. People also buy on internet. So how is this related to your initial thoughts about influence and persuasion?
So I think I should give 2 answers to this question. One has to do with the fact that because the principles have been out there and widely recognized, people might say, "Oh no, I know what you're doing. You're using the social proof principle, or you're using scarcity on me, or you're using authority voices on to get me to do." And my reaction to that is that, actually, provided the information is true, there is true scarcity here. There is a dwindling availability or unique opportunity, or there are a lot of authority voices, or there is good social proof, a lot of trends in the direction of what it is that we're suggesting by similar others to us. We don't want to resist that. That helps us make a good choice. So as long as we use these principles ethically, and by that I mean pointing to them where they exist naturally and representatively in a particular situation that we're in, right, with our audience, there's no reason to push them away, to deflect them or reject them. They represent a good piece of information to tell us when we should say yes. Is it true that a lot of authorities support my idea? Well, then if I present that to you, right, you don't lose by that piece of information. You shouldn't reject it. If I say to you that my book has sold 5 million copies, it's now 5 million copies, right? And I put that on the cover of the book. Is that deceptive? No. Is that manipulative? No. Not if it's true and I point people to it. That's an indication that this might be a good book for them, for a new person to read as well. So for me, the idea that because these principles have been out there a lot, we know about them, people are going to reject them. That's true for me only when those principles have been fabricated, when they've been counterfeited, and they don't really apply in that situation. That's the thing to look out for. That's the thing to reject. Okay. So that's one answer. The other answer is, how has the internet changed things for the use of the principles of influence? And I don't think that the internet has changed the impact of any of the now 7 principles. But what it's changed is which of the principles we can get access to easily in modern day technological terms. And that is social proof. Social proof is now available to us in various kinds of product review sites, chat groups, star ratings, and so on, where we can go before we make a choice in any given direction. We go online and we see what other people have said about it. We see how they've rated it. We see how it rates relative to other choices we could make within that particular domain. And we get some information that allows us to sharpen our choice. I saw an article a while ago that said that of those people who buy products and services regularly on the internet, 98% of them first check product reviews.
Yes.
98%? We can't get 98% of the people in the world to believe that the earth is round. But we get 98% of people going to this powerful source of information, not because it's become more powerful recently, but because it's become more accessible recently. We can get information from around the world, from other people who have similar interests to ours, who have similar needs and challenges about a particular choice. We can get that information easily in a minute. And so for that reason, I think social proof has become much more likely to influence our choices these days.
Yeah. And because social proof is so powerful, I can also imagine that it can be somehow, manipulated even, to convince people to see the product as more attractive. And this refers somehow to the more general question on when I talk to people about influence, about persuasion, people often ask me, what's the difference between influence and manipulation?
Yeah.
What's the border? So and I'm sure you are also asked this question thousands of times.
Yeah.
So what's your answer to this question?
Yeah.
It's a very important question. What's the difference between influence, persuasion on the one hand and manipulation on the other?
Right. And I think it has to do with the ethicality of the way that we present the information. For me, I'm going to stay within the 7 principles of influence now. For me, it is ethically not only acceptable, but ethically commendable. It's ethically admirable to point to one of or another of those principles if it truly exists in the situation. That's persuasion. We are informing people into assent. We're essentially educators. We tell them about true social proof, true scarcity, whatever the situation, whatever we have in the situation. Right? Manipulation is it when we do so deceptively. There's not really, they lie with statistics, right? Or they tell us that this is a scarce commodity when it isn't. They're just providing it at a very low level to people. They're holding it back, or they're saying that this sale ends soon, but it doesn't end. It never ends. So that's the sort of thing that is manipulation. You're manipulating these principles to spur people into assent when they don't really reside there in the situation. You have manufactured their presence there. That's manipulation, it seems to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is really, really important. Yeah. So we have more questions on chat. So maybe I pick up another one. Professor, we know that your books, your knowledge, your research are known and people use them. And who for you is the guru of social psychology? You are guru for so many people. So whom you consider as guru for you?
Daniel Kahneman.
Okay.
Daniel Kahneman. And the way that he has, with research, unpacked our biases, the things that we typically are likely to do in a given situation, right? It's part of the way we were socialized, part of the way we evolved as a species. He's identified those and shown us the reasons that we respond this way and the circumstances under which we respond that way. Yes, his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is just majestic. And he, of course, with his partner Amos Tversky, has a long history of doing the kind of research that unveils these biases and tells us how to inform ourselves about them so we can take steps to protect ourselves against ourselves, essentially. Yeah.
And his very recent book, of which he's co-author, titled Noise, was so interesting, and we'll be happy to have it in Polish this month. I think this is also a very important book. But I would like to mention one more person, somehow related to Daniel Kahneman, Richard Thaler.
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago when I attended a conference in United States. I don't remember what conference was it, but I remember your discussion with Richard Thaler. You two discussed different things. It was a few weeks after Thaler was awarded Nobel Prize in Economics. And as we know, Richard Thaler is co-author of the term nudging. It is also very popular nowadays, and I think nudging is also somehow related to influence, to persuasion. I don't know.
Yes, it is. It is.
So can you comment about it? What are the similarities and differences between persuasion as you understand it and as you described and nudging?
Well, there's a lot of overlap. What Thaler and Sunstein did with the book Nudge, which I think is just a classic. It needs to be read. They also asked themselves, what are the human tendencies that spur people in a particular direction when they find themselves under a certain set of circumstances? Let's say they're uncertain and there's a lot of information in the situation. What do they do under those circumstances? Well, what they often do is use these heuristics inside us, these rules of thumb that we have learned, these shortcuts to decide without really thinking through a lot of the information. And if a communicator can arrange a situation so that these natural tendencies will flow to choices that are in the best interests of the individual, but also the society. That would be the definition of what I think would be a nudge for them, making sure that these tendencies can be channeled in a kind of automatic way to choices that benefit all concerned, not just the person who is requesting the action, but is generally a good choice to make for the person involved, but also for the larger community. So there are some overlaps, but they're of course separate, especially in this idea that it's not just designed, that what's the right thing to do is not just designed to be good for the person who's taking the step, but what they're adding is the idea that this kind of behavior would be beneficial in a general way. If we all did this sort of thing, that the society, the culture would be better, the species, we would be better off. That's really important. And no, he was, I remember that meeting. It was the Judgment and Decision-Making Association meeting. Yeah. And we were supposed to, it's a long story, but he was supposed to interview me on the stage. And then he wins the Nobel Prize. And I said, no, well, I should be interviewing him.
It was super interesting. I remember it. Yeah. Okay, so let's take another question from the chat, longer one. Professor Cialdini, in the past, influencing was based on certain specific skills. Let's call them soft. Today, the impact is obtained based on very precisely collected data that we provide for analysis, like social media applications, search engines. We are reaching a situation where we have to defend ourselves against ourselves. What methods to use to protect oneself in this situation, a complicated situation, but not withdraw from areas such as social media, which have become our second life. So we return again to the issue of social media and this data, overwhelming amount of data. How can we defend ourselves?
Yeah. So one way is, again, you can, because social media and the internet has provided us with the experiences and responses of other people regarding this particular choice, this particular idea or product, we can assess whether it's a good choice for us. Here's the problem that I do see, and you were hinting about it in the last question that you were asked. People who manipulate this social proof, this social information, who provide phony product reviews, who pay others to give their book or their product 4 or 5 stars and so on. And I mean, these are available to cheaters to employ these. And the review sites are constantly at war with these individuals, trying to find, with algorithms, trying to find ways to identify what is a phony review, what is likely to be a genuine one, and so on. And so that's worrisome to me. But the review sites are on our side. They do want to filter out those individuals who are cheating. But there's a way that we are doing it ourselves. Right? You know, when you get star ratings on a product, you can go from 1 to 5. And it turns out that the research indicates that the star rating that is most likely to cause an observer to purchase the product or to say yes to whatever the request is not a 5-star rating. It's a range between 4.2 and 4.7.
Mm-hmm.
People say to themselves, if it's below 4.2, it might not be so great. If it's above 4.7, it might not be real. That rating. And so we protect ourselves.
It's too good to be true.
Too good to be true.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And, you know, it's interesting that my book, the new book, is on the borderline between 4.7 and 4.8 in terms of the star ratings. And it depends on the new ratings, whether it shows up as 4.8. I hope mightily for a 4.7 rating, not a 4.8, because that 4.8 is going to cause people to say, wait a minute, and not be so compelled. So I'm glad that we're doing this. We're not relying on the social media sites, the product review sites to give us to get the cheaters out of there. We do it ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, so because you mentioned your recent book, I like the title very much, is Persuasion. So if you agree, I would like to talk a little bit about this new book. And in Persuasion, you show how subtle turns of phrase, seemingly insignificant visual cues, and apparently unimportant details of location can prime people to say yes even before they are asked. And on the internet, I found your own description of this book. The citation is the following: Persuasion is the practice of getting people sympathetic to your message before they experience it. Is the ability to cause people to have something at the top of their consciousness that makes them receptive to your message that's yet to come. It is very intriguing. So can you tell us something more about it? What's new in this book compared to your classical works?
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story of myself and how I came to recognize how persuasion is different from persuasion. One day, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a man who was asking me to contribute to a good charitable cause. It was for after-school programs in my local school district. And he didn't actually give me any of the credentials to indicate that he was part of my school district. And I hadn't heard any information in my district that it was planning to institute a series of after-school programs for children. But I gave him more money than I normally give to a charity solicitor. And afterward, I closed the door, and I remember kind of leaning against it and saying, well, isn't this interesting? This man didn't use any of my principles. He didn't use liking by complimenting me on my landscaping. He didn't use social proof by saying all my neighbors were contributing to this cause. He didn't use authority by telling me that the experts think that after-school programs are very important for the development of children. But I gave him twice as much money as I normally do. So what did he do? He used persuasion. Now, if you'll hold off for a minute, I'll tell you exactly what he did. But let me give you an example of a study that shows how putting a particular idea or concept in the mind of people before you ask them to say yes to a request is very powerful. It was a study that was done with an online furniture company that specialized in sofas. And with the collaboration of some researchers, for every visitor that went to their site for a week, half of them were directed to a landing page that had fluffy, soft clouds in the background of the landing page. The other half were sent to a landing page that had pennies, small coins in the background of that first page that people went to. It turned out that those people who were cued to softness and comfort then rated softness and comfort as more important to them in what to buy as a sofa. And they actually preferred to purchase more comfortable furniture. Those who were sent to the website with pennies in the background saw price as more important to them in deciding what to purchase among the array of options on this website. And they preferred to buy less expensive furniture because price had come to mind before they were even asked to consider and choose one of the options. And afterwards, the researchers inquired of these people, so did the picture of clouds or pennies make a difference to you? And people laughed. They said, no, of course not. I decide for myself. I determine according to my own priorities, my own standards, what I want to do, never recognizing that what they decided was most important to them was temporarily influenced by what they saw first, right? You know, Daniel Kahneman, who I was telling you is a hero for me, said something very interesting when he was asked if there was one insight about human behavior that you think would help people in their interactions with the world, what would it be? And here's what he said. Nothing is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. Mm-hmm. In other words, bringing someone's attention to a particular concept makes it seem more important because you find yourself paying attention to it and you think, well, it must warrant it must be important enough to justify my attention. And so just as what happened in that sofa study, those people who were initially focused on comfort then chose to think comfort was most important to them and to prefer to purchase comfortable fruits. Those who were focused on pennies, on cost, chose to buy less expensive furniture and to think that price was most important. Well, this is what I think is going on in the concept of persuasion. What you can put in people's minds first enhances their likelihood that when they do encounter your message, and if the message is about quality and comfort, they will be more impressed about it. If the central feature of your message is good price, if you first give them contact to the idea of cost, now cost will be most important for them.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can talk about what happened to me at my door. Right?
Okay.
Here's this guy, and he doesn't give me any of the principles of influence, but I give him twice as much money. What did he do? How did he persuade me before he ever said a word? He brought his 7-year-old daughter with him. And he focused me on children. And he focused me on the challenges of children, and the needs of children. And now, when he made his request for children and the challenges, I had been readied for that message. And that's why I think I gave him twice as much.
I think this is very, very nice example. And I'm looking on the chat, and I see that we have one question related to the very recent situation, unfortunately very tragic situation that we have now in Europe, in Ukraine. And the question is the following: if you became an advisor to President Zelensky, what would you advise him? I know that you were involved in presidential campaign of President Barack Obama, and then am I right that you were also involved in the campaign of Mrs. Hillary Clinton? So you have experience in advising presidents. So would you have any advice to President Zelensky? What could he do?
I think he's doing a terrific job of going to various countries and legislatures around the world, South Korea, Ireland, the United States, the United Kingdom, and making his case directly to those audiences in a very compelling way. I would change one thing about how he is describing the need for assistance. He is saying, Ukraine needs your help. We need your help. He should be using the unity principle. And he should be saying, we as democratic states need to work together for this. We are partners in this. Not that you need to help us, not that you separate us, you versus us, that we use the word we, our, and us, not you and they and us, right? So that's the one thing. I know that works. I know that works. There's research to show that in a negotiation, if one of the parties uses the terms we, our, and us, right, they get a better mutual outcome from the negotiation. Anything that can imply partnership. So, for example, if one of the, in a negotiation, if one of the parties shakes hands at the beginning of the negotiation, you get a better mutual outcome, right? What that handshake is, it reflects a partnership. It reflects a desire for togetherness, right? So anything we can do to bring that to the top of consciousness, the unity between Ukraine and the countries that Zelensky is asking for help with, should help his cause.
I agree that the unity principle is very strong one. And before the webinar, we discussed a little bit the current situation, and we agreed that one of the reasons of why Poles are so open to refugees and why they help so much and engage so much effort in helping refugees is that we have this feeling of unity with those people escaping Ukraine.
You know, in the world, the reputation of Ukrainians has skyrocketed. It's up here.
Yeah.
You know who's second? Poles. because of what you've done.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. It's great to hear that. Okay.
It's remarkable. And we know about it. The world knows about it. And we shake our heads and say, wow, what a people.
Yeah, thank you. This is also important for us. I think we have time for one more question, probably the last question. And I will take the question from the chat. In what store, online or offline, do you prefer buying most and why?
Oh, what store? Amazon books.
So you generally prefer online stores to offline stores?
Well, for convenience, but
Mhm.
not for personalism. Right.
Yeah, okay. So, as I see, there are just 3 minutes left, so it's time to say thank you. It was so much pleasure to talk to you, Professor Cialdini. Thank you very much for everything you told us tonight. And what you do is such a great example of applying science in real life. Because people sometimes see us scientists as, like robots working with their theoretical models. And my personal opinion is that science is only important if it can be applied to real life, and if it can contribute somehow to people's well-being, to people's happiness. And I think your work is a wonderful example of how scientific results can contribute to well-being and to people's happiness. So thank you so much for that.
I think you're right, and I think I would restrict it to the idea of behavioral science. Not all science has to be, the physicist and the chemist. But if we're in the business of understanding behavior better, we are obligated to inform the rest of the world what we found out about human behavior, because in any meaningful way, the non-academic community has paid for the research that we've done with their taxes or their contributions.
Yeah.
We owe them,
right,
to tell. We are required to tell them what we found out about them with their money. They're entitled to know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So once again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and thank you very much for this really wonderful, exciting evening. Thank you very much, Bob.
Okay, so let's say me thank you to you, Professor. It was very big pleasure having a host as you here in WeInnovators. And Tomasz, thank you for great moderating. From this day, I will call you Polish Professor Cialdini.
Thank you.
And of course, I hope we will meet again in the future, and there won't be a war in Ukraine, and we can tell what to do during a peacetime. Thank you, all of them. Thank you, our audience. Thank you, our partners. Thank you for being us. And I really, really happy that we could have this meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.